Welcome, everyone, to Coffee with Keiko. I'm your host, Kyla, and this is my co host, Paige. This is a podcast where we chit chat over some coffee with my friend Keiko the Whale here about anything and everything marine mammals. I am a naturalist in the Pacific Northwest, so this is kind of where my local knowledge is, and I live on I work on the water and live here and love to talk to people about the natural habitat we have. And Paige, she's not a naturalist, but she loves animals and wants to learn more. And so we decided to start this podcast so we can just talk about all the random things, and everyone else gets to listen in too to the fun facts and history that we dive into in this episodes or this show. So
both the show and every episode.
Yeah, exactly. So welcome, and hi, Paige. Good morning.
Hello.
How are you?
Just standy.
Just standy?
Yeah, living life. Good. Living it up.
Before we get too far into real well facts, I think I mentioned to you, I started playing Pokemon Go. Oh. I missed it when it came out in, what was that, 2016? And then this year, I've just been playing it. And they have a lot of marine themed animals, specifically the marine mammals ones. They have lots of sills and stuff. Mm-hmm. And they have a whale one called Whalmer. And it takes 400 whale candies to evolve into the blue whale lord. It makes me sad because it takes a long time to get 400 candies.
You just got to be really dedicated to it.
I do. I don't think I'm that. I don't know. We'll see. I'm trying to evolve my Magikarp into Gyarados right now. Anyway, that's my tangent about this weekend.
Well, I've been pondering since our last episode, we talked a bit about the whaling industry and kind of the change from whales being a kind of resource to whales being kind of very protected and not just ecologically, but socially and in pop culture, we personify a lot onto whales. I would say you either love a whale or you're indifferent to a whale. You're not really. I don't think anyone's anti-whale, at least in the U.S. in the culture in which we grew up in. How did that change happen from it being your corsets to being the oil that lit your home to how we view whales today? Magical, majestic.
You're right. I think, most people, either they love whales or are indifferent to whales, or it's, I've met quite a few people who are scared of whales, and there's still kind of this prevailing idea that a whale might attack you or kill you or hurt you. And, but people don't typically, even though they might be scared of that whale, they don't want to essentially see that whale, killed or taken out of the ocean or used for a resource anymore, which is a huge mental shift. Yes, eventually in the future episodes we'll go into other whale things. That's not the whaling era, but this is a huge part of our relationship with the whale. So I think I'm really glad you asked, because I think it's really important to go into. So whales, whaling era. Humans have been hunting whales for thousands of years. So I just want to kind of say that right now, they have been and still are a very important cultural resource. And small-scale subsistence hunting of whales is not typically the problem. That's not what we're talking about when we say the whaling era. We're talking about commercialized whale hunting, that it was in global international waters. And so global whale hunting really didn't go into place that wasn't really a thing, because humans didn't have the big boats and technology for that until about 1770. The whales were used for everything in our everyday life. We used most of the whales that were hunted were big baleen whales, the ones that have those bristles that coming out from their top jaw that they use as a net, versus the smaller toothed whales like killer whales or even sperm whales. Sperm whales were hunted, but it wasn't for their baleen. It was because they're really big toothed whales that have a lot of fat and oil, and specifically what we talked about, that spermaceti in their head, where their head is so big that we were used for oils and cosmetics. So the baleen, going back to the baleen was used in fashion. It was used in corsets and skirt hoops, and it was used for making things like brooms and brushes. And so the baleen was used for a lot of different things, but then the oil was also substantially important. It was used to make candles and it was used for oil for our lamps. So before electricity, how did we get light? It was lamps, and that lamps was lit by well oil. Other things that it was used for, we started to have machinery for like, trains and the coal processing, and guns for gunpowder. The machinery was lubricated with well oil. That's what kept the parts running. We also Whales ended up playing a huge part in World War One. The oil is really high in nitroglycerins, which essentially can be used, distilled down and used for explosives. So part of the reason that the Britain and their allies beat Germany in World War One is because Britain had access to the Norwegian whaling fleet. So they had all these resources that not only feed their men, but also make these explosives and take care of their machinery with that well oil lubricant that the German forces didn't have. And part of the techniques in World War One was those German U-boats were actually attacking the Norwegian whaling fleet to try to prevent the British from having that resource that was helping them. So I give you all that background to say, whale products were everyday life. It was just how society ran, and it's very similar to essentially nowadays how we use and view the oil industry. Plastics are in everyday life. Oils are in everyday life. And the plastics and oil industry essentially replaced whale products. So if you think about how that's in our everyday life and think about just stopping that, not having any more access to that, what alternative that is, how scary and disruptive that can be for society to have your society based on a product and just not have it anymore. That is why the whaling era was so important. And so people who weren't in that time frame, they think back to killing whales and they're like, oh, that's so mean, that's so immoral, how could they do that? But it's, the same idea now on how we eat burgers, right? You don't see the whole processing that goes into it. You see the final product that you have in your everyday life that you were raised on and is around you and is culturally normal. But how that stopped, right? So to be able to have society globally shift from something so normal to now unacceptable has to be a really big thing. And the crazy part about this is it was really inspired. Is that the word I'm looking for? Push forward, ignited
All
the
of those
change.
things.
The change, the ball got rolling with music. Did you know that humpback whales sing?
Well, we know they vocalize, but
So
yeah,
I'm
I've heard Dory.
Essentially, one of the things that humpback whales are very much known for now is that they sing. And it's not just vocalization. Like researchers have gone through and essentially been able to specify specific notes and how the notes are then repeated in phrases, and those phrases are within a theme, and then that builds into a song. And it's very rare in the animal kingdom to have vocalizations be in these nested hierarchies. That is the notes to the phrase, to the theme, to the song. So like having to actually say this animal is singing a song is not very common.
Mhm.
And essentially during the whaling era, like humans in general did not know that they were singing songs. And what actually ended up leading to that discovery was the Cold War and the Navy, because the Navy had these underwater microphones called hydrophones everywhere. And so the Navy personnel were hearing these sounds and essentially started working with biologists. So the biologists had those recordings and could start analyzing those recordings. And there was a wildlife biologist and cellist, so a musician who plays the cello, who ended up getting into this whale research and made the first spectrograph of a humpback song, which is where you take the sound waves and essentially put it in a visual graph to really show the notes, themes, phrases, song. He made that discovery in 1970. and his spectrograph. It was published in the journal Science, and it was front page of that journal in 1971. And he essentially, this researcher, his name was Roger Payne. And after learning that the whales have their song and publishing it, essentially, he kind of made it his personal mission of we have to save the whales. Because at this point, it was 200 years of intensive global whaling, and a lot of biologists were seeing that, hey, these whale populations are decreasing. We don't know enough about these whales. We might be running them into extinction. And so he heard the song and was like so moved by it. He was like, this song is going to save the whales. And so he essentially pressed the whale song into CDs and just like was doing all of this PR for the humpback whales of getting people to listen to their songs and making this song go global. And by, just 9 years later in 1979, he talked to National Geographic, who was still printing, physical magazines in 1979, and convinced them to include that CD of this humpback whale song in every single printed issue for their January issue, which ended up being almost 11 million copies distributed across the US. And so he gave these humpbacks their voice in a way that humans could actually listen to. And humans have a strong bias for like intellectual creatures, right? Which makes sense. It's like us, we relate with them. And so once we started realizing just how socially complex these animals are, and that they, we respect that intelligence, and then we also connect to each other through music. So once we started hearing that they also connect to each other through music, it gave us a way into their world. And it gave us a way to emotionally kind of connect on these creatures as being like us. And it's really what sparked that fascination in them beyond the resources they gave us.
But it also happened at a time in which, in the 70s, we had plastic petrolatum. Like, we were no longer weren't using corsets or dress hoops as much. Like, if that had happened at a different time when we didn't have other options, it might not have had the same effect. I mean, we don't have to be eating meat.
Yeah.
And people have put a lot of work into showing how horrible the mass farming and how badly we treat animals and animal testing and stuff. Everyone knows it, but we're still doing it now. So in the 70s, everything was plastic.
Yeah.
We weren't lighting our lamps with whale oil.
It's true. It was, there was less whale oil and whale products being used, but it was still a very commercially important resource, for their meat, and there were still other products being used. And so even though it was being phased out by modern fashion products, and it being phased out by modern cosmetic products, and being phased out by electricity and petroleum, yes, there was a lot less physical need to kill whales. But also it's just that kind of understanding of the whales wouldn't really have been possible with modern technology. The underwater hydrophones and the recordings and the CDs, and being able to, essentially make something go viral back in 1970. It's like that's kind of what it was needed to create this collective consciousness to change towards they are a resource to they are essentially like humans, but in the water. And then that kind of created that emotional bond of now we must protect them. I don't know. I guess I'm not a social, I don't study social behavior, but that seems like a really big deal. There's millions of people, billions of people that were alive in 1970 to just unanimously essentially change everyone's mind. Or that the US put in the Marine Mammal Protection Act in 1972, and then there was almost an international agreement in 1982 to put a moratorium on any whaling. That's a pretty big deal.
I mean, it was a big deal. But I'm saying that they did it because in the US they weren't using very many whale products.
It's true. It is true. That does help when you don't.
In 1979, 7 years after they had already banned it in the US, it's easier.
Yeah.
It's just more reason why, that perspective is just very different. But it's still, I mean, when we're saying we say it was an international effort, but there's not, it's not actually international. There are still people in the world that don't see whales the way that the US sees whales.
It's true.
It was international, but it wasn't actually, it was the Western world.
Yeah. Which also like really interesting because the Western culture were the ones that were like actively demonizing a lot of these species,
Yeah.
right? So like using basking sharks as and killer whales and all these other species essentially as like target practice because they were thought to be a nuisance that were getting tangled in the fishing nets and competing with fishermen and like this kind of like very active just let's clear out a species because they're in the way or because we think they're evil. um and so it was a huge switch from let's kill them because we don't care to we need to essentially fight each other to make sure that no one harms a hair on any whale's snout again, right? Yes. Big swing. Coolest started by a musician. Very heavily US bias in the story.
Yeah.
Yes.
This is the story of how the United States changed its perspective.
Yeah.
Probably Canada a little bit.
Roger Payne was an American
Yeah.
biologist
Yes.
in the Journal of Science and National Geographic, which are both based in the US. So,
Yeah.
yes.
So it's a great story.
It's a great story.
And it explains how the United States changed
With international influence, but
with international influence. Yeah. But it was not, this is not a global change. I don't think there is a global idea at all right now.
I think that's it. The US was very culturally accepted to killer whales and had a long history of relying on their products. But then, as you said, plastics came in, and so we didn't rely as much on the products. And there's this musician, Roger Payne, who came to the rescue and recorded their song, proved it was a song, and humanized them. So we humans in North America, at least, developed a much more deeper emotional connection to them, where we were like, we shall not kill whales anymore. And that's really great because the whaling era did decimate a lot of their populations, and so in a lot of regard, this swing to deep emotional connection to protect their populations has really saved many of them from extinction. Because before cameras, there was no really way to keep track of individual whales, so we didn't know their social structure. They don't live in family groups like lions that are easy to see. Humpback whales, very, very social creatures, but they're, sometimes communicating and hanging out with each other in pairs of two or three, or still hanging out and communicating with each other from a mile away. And we don't really see that as hanging out, but they do because their voices can carry so far. And because they don't live in these tight knit family groups, like we had really no concept about what it was like to be a whale and what their life was like until modern things like hydrophones and cameras started to actually be able to let us go into the world and understand them better. And so now we know that because we can ID specific humpback whales with the way their tails, their flukes look, we know that they form best friends. We know that they can have a calf every year, but more often they have a calf every 2 to 5 years. They will take gap years in between calves. So they're not as like prolific as people could have potentially thought they were back in the 1800s. We also know that they're really long lived and take a long time to mature. At least some species do, which we didn't know that before. So typically, baleen whales, just like in general, are sexually mature between the age of 6 to 9, compared to things like, deer, which are mature after 1 to 2 years. That's can be a big difference on resource management on when they're mature. And we didn't know how long they lived, and we still really don't know how long they live because these photo ID studies have only been going on for 50 to 60 years now, and they're very long lived. So there are still humpbacks being seen that were seen back in the 70s that are estimated to be 65 years old. So there are ways to estimate age and other things. And that was an important part of understanding whale biology was the whaling era.
Mhm.
Is because a lot we don't understand off of them being alive. Like there is some aspect that there was a lot of science that was collected during the whaling era. I'm not saying it's good. I'm not saying we should do that. I'm just saying it happened and it decimated lots of populations, which is really bad. But the small silver lining is that it gave a lot of anatomy data. And one of the things that they learned was that you can estimate a baleen whale's age by their earwax. It's called earplug analysis. They essentially take the earwax out of the ear canal and they cut it like you chop a tree. And then there's a new layer for each year that that whale's alive. So they can like count the rings like you do on a tree ring to estimate the whale age. And some of the oldest estimated humpbacks were in their 90s. There's still a lot we don't know about these animals, which is why it's good that they're protected so we can continue to have that time to learn more. Let's see. I'm going to play a humpback vocalization for you.
How do humpbacks phonate?
They don't have vocal cords in the way that we describe humans having vocal cords, and it also depends on what kind of whale you're looking at. So for toothed whales, they have what's called phonic lips, which is essentially like these flaps of skin in their blowholes. That's how they're producing sound out of it, is like pushing air out through the blowhole and making these
So
phonic
they have vocal
lips
cords of their
in
blowhole.
their like nose, essentially. But for the humpback whales and the baleen whales, they have it's like they have structures kind of like vocal cords. They have a voice box and they have like a U-shaped tissue that pushes against the fat and muscle sac that's in their voice box that creates these sound vibrations. You need air, some kind of thing to make that vibration. So how are they making that vibration if they are under the water? And they do have small air pouches that essentially push the air against their voice box to make these vibrations. So then the next question is like, I'm talking right now, I'm exhaling out as I talk. I eventually have to breathe in to get that air back. But these are animals that will dive down and sing for 40 minutes straight. And it's essentially they have these small air sacs that push it through and then push it back through. And so they just recycle that air back and forth so they can sing and vocalize without actually using the air and needing to take a breath sooner. So
Mm-hmm.
that's about the extent of my knowledge on how they actually produce that sound. A lot of the like, oh, whales sing is based off of humpback whales, and the humpback whales have their song CDs everywhere. You can like just go online and buy a CD of a humpback song. Like it, I had a CD of humpback songs when I was 5 years old. Like it's just very prevalent. Lots of other whales also do sing. They're just it's less famous because they're not quite as charismatic as the humpback whales. Humpback whales have those really long pectoral fins and they jump out of the water and people go and see them in like Hawaii and they're a global species. You can go around the world and see humpback whales. So people just really have that more exposure to humpback whales. But blue whales, fin whales, the other baleen whales in the same family as the humpback whales called rorquals, they sing too. It's just not as complex. And then there are some species, specifically the bowhead whale, that sings more complex songs. So, like musicians and acoustic biologists have listened to humpback song and been like, okay, that's like comparative to say classical music. versus a bowhead whale song is comparative to, say, jazz music, where it's a lot more free form and it changes a lot. It doesn't have like the strict phrases that it repeats. And with bowhead whales, they can make two frequencies at the same time, similar in, I guess, in the same way that a toothed whale can. So it gives bowhead whales this kind of complex edge over humpback whale songs that they can make a high pitched and a low pitched frequency at the same time. And I was trying to look into like the research papers on how they do that. And ultimately, what I gleaned from the research papers I read is we don't really know how they make the two frequencies at the same time, which is pretty cool.
I mean, it's so entwined with our respiratory system.
Yeah.
You know, our nasal sinuses play a big part, obviously our voice part, and then, you know, our speech is greatly impacted by lip and tongue movement. But we can make Dory whale sound, whatever, you know, force vibration through. But we still need the air. It would make sense in the water. You can produce vibration through the water, you know, if you had just through the projection, obviously through the blowhole and all the other things. So it makes sense that they'd have a very different system.
Mm-hmm.
And they could do less work and get a further distance with the water.
Yep. Yep. Yeah.
Physics.
Just because,
Wave.
you know, sound is the
Particles.
vibration, there's the wave, and the air molecules are spread out so that
Molecules.
that wave particles.
You said molecules. Molecules, particles, molecules.
I'm sleep deprived. It's fine. The air molecules are spread out, so the sound waves dissipate quicker over that space. And then in the water, since water is a thicker medium, the molecules are closer together, so that sound can be translated farther. But also with being in water, it's a 3D environment. And so like if you're underwater, this is really important if you're like a scuba diver and you hear boat sounds. You don't actually really necessarily know where it is because our two ears aren't necessarily good at triangulating and figuring out the location of the point of the sound because as it kind of like dissipates, it dissipates more uniformly than in the air. So like our ability to pinpoint where that sound is coming from is a lot harder. And because of that, there was a lot of whale communication stuff that we didn't took 40 or 50 years to figure out. And the one that I'm specifically thinking of right now, there's these things called minke whale boings, where essentially they make an underwater boing sound. And during the same era that the humpback whale songs were being recorded, there was also these boing sounds that no one had any idea what they were until it wasn't until 2002 that researchers finally were able to figure out that this boing sound that was just mysteriously happening and being picked up on hydrophones was actually being made by minke whales in the North Pacific. Yeah.
But you know, sound localization is always very difficult. Like because our ears are like we have really a greater sense of right and left differentiation because we have an ear on either side of our head. But we have really bad above and below us differentiation. If you have a sound that's directly above you versus directly below you, you can't tell the difference. Which there are some land animals like owls, their right and left ear they're offset so that they are able to differentiate above and below as well as left and right. But us humans with ears on equal sides cannot differentiate. Yeah.
That's so cool. Yeah. Dolphins, they have a similar thing where their ears are also not exactly the same. Their entire skull is actually slightly asymmetrical, where one side is slightly like curved and smaller than the other side. That gives them a better directionality with sound production.
Yeah.
Back to humpbacks. Or do you have more to say about the ears?
I mean, you know me. I can talk about ears a lot.
This is true. That is your favorite body part. Have you heard why humpbacks sing?
Do they sing for a different reason than the why we sing? Is it to hunt fish?
No. Well, sometimes do a little bit of song here and there, but in general, they don't sing in their feeding grounds. In general, the singing behavior is seen in the breeding grounds. And what the data has shown so far are the individuals that sing are males. And so
Breeding, mating behavior.
that has been the assumption. And
Okay.
so if you like read whale books and like whale documentaries and just like general internet stuff, it's like, yes, the males sing to attract the mates. Like birds. They're being compared to birds, but whales are not birds. And we don't actually know. And so there's a lot of argument because like researchers have gone and video recorded the singing male humpbacks, and it's like the females don't seem to show actually any interest. They don't seem to care whatsoever. So it could be for female attraction, but that kind of leading hypothesis is starting to change. And so now it's thinking it could be a form of male to male communication as a way to either
This girl's
communicate,
my girl.
huh?
This is my girl.
Potentially, or potentially like, bro, I'm stronger and bigger than you. You have no chance. Or it could be like a way of like building alliances. Like maybe that's like, hey, here's my song. Come sing my song with me. Or it could just be a way for humpbacks to communicate that this is a breeding ground in a way similar to how coral polyps know to settle at a coral reef because they hear the coral reef sounds. Like it could just be essentially a homing device more so than a competition device. We don't really know. So if people tell you male humpbacks sing to impress the females, the answer is we
Maybe.
don't actually know.
Yeah.
Maybe, but maybe not.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, isn't it? It's kind of everything, isn't it? It goes from maybe to probably.
Right. But I think
But
like
we
that's
know.
the whole point is like
Yeah.
growing up, I thought it was probably to attract a mate. And now as I've learned more about it, it's like there's not really a probably there. It's definitely more still in the maybe of like it could be any one of these things, it could be all of these things, it could be none of these things. We don't actually have a solid grasp on the purpose and function of the singing.
Because I mean, the biology knowledge I have is always like, if only a males have it, then it's generally a breeding thing.
Right.
Like, but if all males, females have it, it's a resource thing that's not females. Like in horns and antlers. If
Mhm.
only the males have the antlers because they're using it to beat each other up. But if males and females have antlers, it's because they're beating everyone up.
Yeah.
So, you know.
Well, and in other species like bowhead whales, like females do sing. And so it, from what I can read, researchers are fairly confident that the singing humpbacks are males. I am not a humpback researcher. I am not an acoustic researcher. So I don't know what percent uncertainty is in that data. So none of this might actually matter. The point of this was that we don't actually know why the males sing
Mhm.
and if it is purely a female attraction breeding thing, like you were saying with other traits that are, usually if only the male has it, usually it is a sexual reproduction purpose. And we don't know enough about this to say that about humpbacks.
Yeah. So the answer is humpbacks sing. We don't know why. And it's really hard to study big animals in the ocean. Even with the amount of technology that we have today, there are still questions to be learned.
Yes.
And the musician, though he was still a biologist, played a large role in how we perceive whales today versus how they perceived whales pre 1970s. To
Excellent.
recap,
That was a fantastic recap.
if I watched this episode and I really like humpbacks, are there humpback photos on kylasnaturalphotos.com for me to
There,
purchase or gift?
yes. Lots of humpback photos. If you go to kylasnaturalphotos.com, as you said, and there's the buy gifts and photos tab. You can do by tour date if you've ever been on a tour with me, but if you have not, you can go down to photographers' favorites, and then there's the different like titles. So if you like birds or dolphins, or there's one that's humpbacks, and humpbacks is I think my second biggest folder after orcas. There's a lot of humpbacks I've seen up here. And so you can just scroll through and there's humpbacks that are feeding because we are in the feeding grounds where they come up and lift their mouth out of the water. There's humpbacks that are breaching. There's humpbacks that are socializing, peck slapping. And then there's humpbacks that are just being pretty and showing us their dorsal fins or their flukes with some mountains in the background. So lots of humpback options. And then my shirt is also a humpback. Yes. So thank you so much for joining us today with this episode with Coffee with Keiko. Subscribe, follow Kyla's Naturals Photos. I have this obviously on YouTube and also on Instagram, Facebook, and TikTok for things like reels and photo posts and other content like that. So please follow. And then if you want to see more of Paige and I and our shenanigans and kind of content that didn't make episode criteria, support me on Buy Me a Coffee. I have Buy Me a Coffee. It's basically an alternative to Patreon where you can sign up for the Coffee Pod membership. And with the Coffee Pod membership, you get early access to these episodes, but also there's behind the scenes kind of bloopers where you get to hear more of the unfiltered, true Paige and Kyla behind the scenes. And with that, thank you so much for joining us today. Bye.